My family refused to pay for my college and then asked me to pay $140,000. I was born in the small town of Maplewood, nestled in the heart of the Midwest. Our family home was a modest two-story house on Elm Street, where I lived with my parents and my older sister, Evelyn. She was just 2 years my senior, but the gap between us felt much wider. My father owned a quaint cafe downtown, Harper's Corner, which provided enough for us to live comfortably. My mother stayed at home, occasionally helping out at the cafe during busy weekends. Our life wasn't extravagant, but we had what we needed. Evelyn was the shining star of our family. I remember one evening after a school event, Mom was beaming with pride. "Evelyn, your presentation was absolutely brilliant," she said, her eyes glistening. "You're going to achieve great things." I stood in the doorway, clutching my own certificate from the science fair, unnoticed. This was the pattern of my childhood. Evelyn received the newest gadgets, while I inherited her hand-me-downs. She wore designer clothes, I got her outgrown outfits. Family gatherings were centered around Evelyn's achievements. "Did you hear about Evelyn's SAT scores?" Dad would boast. "Top percentile and president of the debate club." I learned to fade into the background during these conversations. My straight A's and role as treasurer of the environmental club never seemed to warrant a mention. It wasn't that I was underperforming, I was doing well. But in our household, well was synonymous with not good enough. One afternoon, while helping Mom fold laundry, she turned to me and said, "Lena, you should consider practical career options. Maybe something in retail or service. There's nothing wrong with honest work." Her words stung, but I had grown accustomed to the subtle reminders of my perceived limitations. Looking back, those early years set the stage for what was to come: the constant comparisons, the subtle put-downs, the clear message that I was somehow less than my sister. These experiences left marks that would take years to heal. But sometimes, the deepest wounds become the strongest motivations. I still remember the day Evelyn received her college acceptance letter. The entire house erupted in celebration. Mom prepared her favorite dinner, Dad brought home an expensive bottle of wine, and they spent the evening discussing her future. "Our brilliant girl is going to one of the best colleges in the state," Mom couldn't stop smiling. "We've been saving for this moment since you were born, sweetheart." I sat quietly at the dinner table, pushing food around my plate, imagining what my own celebration would be like in 2 years. I should have known better. When my turn came, the response was starkly different. I had worked hard to maintain good grades, joined clubs, and even took extra courses to boost my college applications. But none of that seemed to matter. "College?" Mom laughed dismissively when I brought up the subject. "Lena, be realistic. We just can't afford to send you to college. Besides, you're not really college material." "But what about all the money you saved for Evelyn?" I asked, my voice trembling. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That was different. Evelyn had a clear path, exceptional grades. You're more suited for practical work. Speaking of which, I could use another waitress at the cafe." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I could work while studying," I pleaded. "Please, just help me get started. We could borrow from relatives or take out a loan. I'll pay back every penny with interest. I'll even get it in writing with a lawyer." "We never borrow from anyone, on principle," Mom said coldly. "We don't borrow money, and we're not going to change our principles for you. You need to accept your limitations and find a suitable job." I spent that night crying in my room. But by morning, determination had replaced my tears. I went to the only people who had ever truly seen me, my grandparents. "Grandpa, Grandma, I need your help," I explained everything through tears at their kitchen table. "I can't just give up on college. I can't." Grandpa's eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. "We don't have savings, sweetheart, but let me see what I can do. No grandchild of mine is going to have their dreams crushed like this." The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. First, the disappointment of the bank rejecting the loan application. Then, the shocking moment when Grandpa announced he was selling their old country house and the plot of land it sat on. The sale of the property provided exactly enough for my college tuition. I applied to study investment management in a city far from home, as far as I could get from the constant reminders of my family's lack of faith in me. The day I left, Mom and Dad didn't even come to say goodbye. Only my grandparents stood at the bus station, Grandma hugging me tight while Grandpa wiped away what he tried to pretend weren't tears. From that day forward, I cut ties with my parents completely. When breaks came and I had to return to town, I stayed with my grandparents in their now smaller house. Their sacrifice meant everything to me, and every time I walked into their modest home, I was reminded of what real family support looked like. College was everything I'd hoped for and everything I feared. At first, I felt like an imposter, walking through lecture halls where everyone else seemed so certain, so polished. But I held on to what Grandpa had told me the night before I left. "You've already proven you belong, Lena. Now show them why." And I did. I poured myself into my studies, stayed up late researching financial theories, and volunteered for every project that could help me grow. When others partied, I tutored. When they rested, I networked. There was no room for failure, not when every class, every grade, was built on a sacrifice far too big to squander. I still stayed in touch with my grandparents weekly. They never failed to ask how my exams went or whether I was eating enough. My parents never called, not once in 4 years. Neither did Evelyn. When graduation day arrived, I wore my cap and gown with quiet pride. There was no cheering section for me in the stands, no handmade signs or family hugs. But my grandparents were there. Grandma wore her Sunday best, and Grandpa took photos with his old film camera. "You did this," I whispered to them, holding my diploma tightly. "No," Grandpa said. "You did." After graduation, I moved back to Maplewood briefly while I looked for jobs. It was a difficult market, especially for someone fresh out of college, no connections, and little experience. I spent weeks sending out resumes, practicing for interviews that didn't come. Eventually, I accepted a position at a modest trading company in Ridgeville, a neighboring city. It wasn't the Wall Street type firm I once dreamed of, but it was an honest start. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. The floors creaked, the water pressure was inconsistent, and the paint peeled in places, but it was mine. Every bill was paid with money I earned myself. For a while, life felt still but purposeful. I worked quietly, learned the ropes, and stayed close to my grandparents. On weekends, I would take the bus home to visit, helping Grandma with her garden or sharing coffee with Grandpa at the breakfast table. Then, one Thursday evening, the unexpected happened. My phone lit up with a call from Evelyn. "Hi, Lena. It's been so long," her voice chirped like nothing had ever happened. "You should come over this weekend. We're having dinner, just the family." I hesitated but agreed. Maybe things had changed. Maybe adulthood had mellowed the harshness of our past. I should have known better. I arrived at Evelyn's new home, a pristine colonial with matching cars in the driveway. Inside were our parents, Evelyn, and her fiancé, a man named Brant who looked like he had been printed from a corporate catalog. The dinner began pleasantly enough. But as the courses came and the wine flowed, the questions began. "So," Mom asked casually, "you're working at, what was it? A small firm?" "A boutique trading company in Ridgeville," I replied, careful to keep my tone even. "I'm building my portfolio experience." Evelyn snorted gently. "Boutique sounds nicer than barely known." Dad chuckled. "Hey, as long as it pays the bills. My offer still stands, by the way. You'd make a great floor manager at the cafe. A college degree behind the register would be quite the story." They laughed. Brant offered a polite smile but didn't meet my eyes. I stared down at my plate, the food turning cold. Evelyn leaned in with feigned concern. "Where do you live again?" "Off Wesley Road," I answered quietly. Her eyebrows rose. "Oh. That part of Ridgeville?" She looked at Brant and mouthed something I didn't catch. Mom stage whispered, "Well, not everyone can afford better." That was the moment I realized nothing had changed. Not really. I was still the backup act, the afterthought, the "well, at least she's trying" daughter. "You know what?" I said, my voice steady but firm. "I'd rather live in a tiny apartment in a neighborhood you turn your nose up at than in a house filled with this kind of pride." I stood, grabbed my coat, and left without looking back. That night, I promised myself I would never let them make me feel small again. Months passed. I worked hard overtime, weekends, every opportunity one could find. I began taking certification courses online and attending networking events. I refined my skills in asset management, investment forecasting, and client engagement. Slowly but surely, I made a name for myself. Then came a call that would change everything. "Lena," said a voice I hadn't heard in years. It was Monica, my college roommate. "You're not going to believe this. Remember how we used to dream about working at Benson Adler Group?" Of course I remembered. It was one of the most prestigious investment firms in the region. "They're opening a satellite office right here in Ridgeville. And they're looking for fresh blood. I already put in your name." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I dusted off my resume, updated my certifications, and drafted the best cover letter I'd ever written. The interview was nerve-wracking. They asked detailed questions, ran mock analysis scenarios, and grilled me on market strategy. But every long night at the office, every weekend spent building spreadsheets and studying quarterly trends, had prepared me for this. 2 weeks later, I got the job. From day one, I gave it everything. While others clocked out at 5, I stayed until the lights dimmed. I volunteered for high-stakes accounts and began earning a reputation for turning stagnant portfolios into high-yield stories. My first project saw a 35% return in just 2 quarters. My second project doubled that. I didn't just catch up, I surged ahead. 2 years passed, and the job at Benson Adler changed everything for me. I worked harder than I ever had, and the returns spoke for themselves. My name began circulating in higher circles. Partners started requesting me for client reviews. I had earned their respect not because of who I was related to or where I came from, but because I delivered. One Friday afternoon, my supervisor stopped by my desk. "Lena, have a moment?" he asked. "Great work on the Devereaux portfolio. Management's been impressed." He handed me an envelope. Inside, a performance bonus that was nearly double my first year's salary at the previous firm. I sat there in stunned silence. I didn't splurge. I invested. Everything I had learned about stocks, real estate, long-term gains, I used it all to build my future. Within 6 months, I closed on a beautiful apartment on Ridgeville Heights, the city's most prestigious address. Floor-to-ceiling windows, oak cabinetry, and a skyline view that caught the sunrise just right every morning. It was mine, every inch of it, paid for by my own work. To celebrate, I visited my grandparents and handed Grandpa a small envelope with a key inside. "What's this?" he asked. I smiled. "Come outside." Parked in the driveway was a new sedan, sleek, silver, and reliable. "But, Lena, no, we can't accept. You once sold your home so I could chase my dreams," I said. "This car barely repays that, but it's a start." He didn't say anything for a moment. Just pulled me into a hug that said it all. Then came the knock on my door. It was a crisp Saturday morning. I had just poured my coffee when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Opening the door, I nearly dropped my mug. "Evelyn?" She stood there in her designer coat, clutching her purse a little too tightly. "I was in the area," she said, stepping in without waiting for permission. "I thought I'd say hi." "Really?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Because the last time I saw you, you called me a charity case behind my back." Her eyes flicked nervously around the apartment. "This place is incredible. You must be doing really well." "I am," I said flatly. We sat awkwardly in the living room. I could tell she had rehearsed this visit. Eventually, she got to it. "So, there's something we need help with." There it was. She began explaining how she and Brant were planning a large wedding at an estate venue on the lake, complete with catering, live music, and designer flower arrangements. "Our parents committed to covering half," she said. "But the total cost ended up higher than expected. It's looking like $280,000. I blinked. "And they promised to pay $140,000? "Yes. But they don't have that kind of money. They were hoping maybe you could step in, as a loan, of course." I laughed once, dry and quiet. "They told me I wasn't college material," I said. "When I asked for help, they said they don't believe in borrowing. Now they want me to fund Evelyn's dream wedding?" She frowned. "It's not just about me. It's about our family. Mom and Dad would be humiliated if they had to admit they can't keep their promise." "Were they humiliated when they dismissed my ambitions? When they let Grandpa sell his land so I could go to school, while they saved every penny for you?" "Lena, don't make this about the past." "It is about the past," I said firmly. "Because if you treated me like family then, this wouldn't feel like a transaction now." She stood, her tone sharpening. "Fine. I thought maybe you'd grown past all that, but clearly you haven't." I opened the door. "And I thought maybe you'd changed." Without another word, she left. A week later, the phone rang again. This time, it was my parents. "Lena," Dad began awkwardly, "we wanted to check in. We heard from Evelyn. It seems you weren't open to helping." "I wasn't," I said. Mom cut in, her voice tight. "We're not asking for a handout. Just a loan." "No, you're asking for a bailout. You made promises you couldn't keep, and now you expect me to fix it. We thought maybe you'd want to give back. After all we've done." I stared at the skyline, remembering cold dinners, unspoken dismissals, and a silence that had lasted years. "Tell me something," I asked quietly. If I were the one getting married, would you have done the same for me? They didn't respond. I didn't need them to. I'm not a bank, I said finally. And I'm not your backup plan. We raised you better than this, Mom said, her voice rising. No, you raised me to believe I was less than. And I worked hard to prove you wrong. You don't get to profit from that now. I ended the call. The wedding still happened. I wasn't invited. I didn't expect to be. My grandparents received an invitation but politely declined. Instead, we had a small celebration of our own dinner, homemade pie, laughter that wasn't performative or forced. A week later, I saw photos online. Evelyn looked stunning in her custom gown. Brant wore an expression that seemed more composed than joyful. My parents posed in expensive clothes, their smiles stretched thin. In one picture, Brant's mother had her lips pursed, her eyes aimed at my father with visible discomfort. The image said everything that words didn't have to. Later that week, I received a text from an old acquaintance who had attended the wedding. Thomas's parents were not impressed. Apparently, your folks had to explain the financial mix-up at the rehearsal dinner. It got awkward. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on my balcony overlooking the skyline, and let the cool breeze wash over me. They could have had me in their corner. But they made their choice. And I made mine. The fallout from the wedding spread through Maplewood like a late autumn chill. At first, I thought I'd feel smug or vindicated, but mostly, I just felt still. The storm had passed, and I remained untouched by it. Word traveled fast in our small town, and even faster through the grapevine that my parents had carefully cultivated for years. Suddenly, I was no longer the quiet, dutiful daughter who'd gone off to school. I was the one who turned her back on her family, who refused to help with her sister's big day. I heard the whispers secondhand. A distant cousin who cornered my grandmother at church. A neighbor who just thought it was such a shame. A comment left unaddressed at the local co-op. Money changes people, doesn't it? It would have hurt years ago. But now? It only reminded me how far I'd come. One Sunday evening, I was having dinner with my grandparents, the same meal we'd shared countless times: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and peach cobbler. After dessert, Grandpa set his fork down and looked across the table. Your mother called yesterday, he said evenly. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. She wants another chance to explain. She asked if we'd consider selling the car, he replied, watching my reaction. The car. The one I'd given them after my first big bonus. A thank you, a symbol of gratitude and closure. She said, you sold the land for Lena. You could sell the car for Evelyn. I felt my stomach tighten. And what did you say? I told her, Grandpa said, that you don't sell gifts from family members who actually love you. Then I hung up. I reached for his hand across the table. You don't have to defend me. He shook his head. No, I don't. But I will. Grandma gave a soft smile. We don't regret what we gave you, Lena. Not for a second. What you've built, this life you've made, that's our legacy too. As winter settled in, I found myself focusing on work more than ever. I began mentoring junior analysts, speaking on panels, and giving back where I could. I started a scholarship at the local community college in Grandpa's name, quietly, anonymously. I didn't need applause. I just wanted to be the kind of support I had once needed. Still, Evelyn wasn't done. With 2 weeks left before the new year, she showed up unannounced again. I opened the door to see her bundled in a cashmere coat, a smile fixed tightly on her face. Can we talk? She asked. I hesitated but stepped aside. She didn't sit this time. She walked to the window, gazed at the skyline, and spoke without turning around. Things have been difficult since the wedding. Brant's family isn't thrilled with us. His mother barely speaks to mine. And Brant's already traveling more. I think he's pulling away. I waited. She turned back toward me. Lena, I know you probably don't want to hear this. But I miss having a sister. I folded my arms, keeping my expression neutral. Or you miss the idea of someone who would fix things when they go wrong? She sighed. Maybe both. There was a long silence before I replied. You know, I used to think we were just different. That you were the favorite and I wasn't. But it was more than that, Evelyn. I was dismissed. Ignored. Told that my dreams were too big, that I wasn't worth investing in. And it wasn't just Mom and Dad. It was you, too. I know, she said quietly. And now that I've made something of myself, you don't get to rewrite the story. I didn't get here because someone cleared the way for me. I got here because I walked through every storm they said I wouldn't survive. She didn't argue. She just nodded. I'm sorry, she whispered. I really am. And maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. But I had stopped measuring truth by someone else's remorse. I hope things work out for you, I said. But this is where I stay. I opened the door. Evelyn stepped outside, turned back once, and then walked away. A new year arrived quietly. I didn't hear from my parents. They didn't call. Neither did Evelyn. But life went on. I hosted my first team retreat at the office and led my division's strategy meeting. I bought a second investment property. My grandparents and I took a trip to Oregon. Grandma had always wanted to see the coastline there. And on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, the return address familiar. It was from my Aunt Miriam, one of the few relatives who'd kept her distance during all the drama. Inside was a note. Lena. I don't know what really happened. But I've been watching. I've seen you build something strong and steady, and I just wanted you to know some of us are proud of you. Miriam. I smiled, folded the letter, and tucked it into the top drawer of my desk. I still walk past Harper's Corner sometimes. The cafe looks smaller now than I remember. My parents still run it. Customers still trickle in for morning coffee and eggs over easy. Evelyn occasionally helps out behind the register. They wave to the regulars. Pretend that everything is fine. And maybe for them, that's enough. But not for me. I came from the same place. From the same house, the same town, the same kitchen table. But I didn't stay there. I learned to build something they never could understand, self-worth that wasn't borrowed. And a future that wasn't inherited. As I stand on my balcony now, coffee in hand, watching the city bathe in golden light, I know this one thing for certain. Some bridges were meant to be burned. And I've made peace with the ashes. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.